at the end of the day, do we let it control us, or do we control the narrative personally about how it affects us?
Thank you for joining me on the Unrefined Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Spain, along with Lindsay Waters and BT Wallace, where each week we delve into the mysteries that shape our world, from the tangible to the supernatural, with the foundation rooted in biblical truth. For more content and exclusive resources, visit us at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, you guys. Not everything is as it seems, and sometimes the biggest revelations come from asking questions no one else will. Today, we're again breaking conventional thinking and diving into the unknown. Let's challenge what we've been told while exploring the truth that's been hiding in plain sight. Our guest knows all about navigating the maze of deception and exposing what others would rather keep locked away. I want to welcome to our show today, Joel Thomas, host of Free the Rabbits podcast. Thanks, Joel, for being here today.
Thanks, guys, for having me on.
Yeah, it's really amazing. One of our listeners told me about you and your new podcast, and your first podcast had me hooked because, and the guys can chime in with this. This is like our heart. We don't want to put out, and I hate this terminology, misinformation. I hate that word because it's been obviously abused and used. But I listened to that first podcast. I'm like, this is amazing. I got to have this guy on here because in the fringe space, or in this area that we're in, the conspiracy space, I think that people need some balance. We're so thankful that you came on our show just to talk about that and talk about the whole Cass Sunstein document. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the other guy's name. Anyway, I read through it. It was amazing. It's really interesting. I could see a lot of things you were talking about on the podcast and his stuff. So to just kind of set the stage, will you tell everybody out there a little bit about yourself and why you got interested in this Cass Sunstein?
Yeah. I'm host of Free the Rabbits podcast, but it's a fairly new podcast in the past 7-8 months. I've podcasted all over for probably 3 years prior to that. How I even got into podcasting, man, I don't really know. It just kind of happened. I had no direction as far as wanting to really do it. I just met some podcasters and became really good friends with them. One of those guys is Tony Merkel from the Confessionals, and he reached out to me because I had a music producer send him some music that I had done. Tony really liked it, reached back out to me, and he and I became really good friends after that. I flew to Philly. I've done a few shows with him on the Confessionals, and it kind of spawned out into films where we go all around the world looking for cryptids and the paranormal, and we try to do it from a biblical lens and try to understand what these things are from that lens, and also at the same time understanding we don't know much about it at all. Also, everything ain't evil. So that's the other part too. Christians are pretty good at, if they don't understand it, it automatically becomes a Nephilim or it's a demonic entity. Not to say that those things don't exist and those things aren't a part of these spaces for sure. There's a lot of deception going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always that. And I think that is part of why I wanted to break out and branch out and do my own podcast, was to try to understand some of this stuff from a biblical lens, but at the same time, leave a lot of gray area about things we don't really know. Because one of the things that I talked to several guys who I'm close to, who are, biblical scholars, and they understand the weird, strange, unseen world, to borrow terminology from Michael Heiser.
Yeah.
But to understand that world, we don't know much about it. I mean, to say that, here's for instance, right? Say you and I were in the jungle together and we ran across a tiger, right? Tiger's not inherently evil, but it will eat you. It will tear you up. Say you ran across something in the interdimensional space. It might not necessarily be evil. It could be more along an animal lines of thinking. So say that thing didn't know what you were and it attacked you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's demonic. It just means that it was some sort of animal that maybe was from this other realm or realms. We have no idea.
Maybe more neutral.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we got to leave a lot of credence for neutrality too, because we don't really understand a lot. Listen, I've studied conspiracy since I was a kid. It's really funny. My mom sent me some books I had as a kid, and one of them was called Bigfoot's Breath, and the other one was The Portal. And it was books I was reading when I was 6, 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I've always been into this stuff. My parents have encouraged it. My father, who still is a preacher to this day, he would tell you more about the supernatural than anyone. I mean, he was down a dark path before he found Christ, and he got involved with some Satanists. He was trying to become a Satanist and moved down to Texas to where the Church of Satan was at the time. And he's seen a lot of stuff. So he understands that this unseen realm exists. So I grew up knowing that, right? And then my mom always encouraged, when I would go to Blockbuster, back when Blockbuster was a thing, I would go get, the Bermuda Triangle videos and documentaries and Bigfoot and gray aliens, whatever. I was always getting my hands on that kind of stuff.
Are you old enough to remember Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of? Do you remember that show?
I do remember it. I think I was a little bit more in the age bracket of Unsolved Mysteries when they used to do their breakaway episodes when they would talk about UFOs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So for me, I was always interested in this stuff, and I always studied conspiracies. And I grew up in a period of time where there wasn't so much volatility when it came to conspiracies. I remember being in a room with maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 people, and you might be at some party or relaxed event or something, and you're talking to people, and people are just spitballing, and they're talking about their ideas or stuff they've heard, and nobody got in an argument or fight. It was just, we don't really know, and everybody encouraged the free thinking. It doesn't exist anymore, and especially in the conspiratorial world, it definitely doesn't exist anymore. It's just a bunch of people who are living in their own little tiny echo chambers, screaming at each other all the time about, I've got it right and you've got it wrong. Well, that's impossible. It's like saying you're a Bigfoot expert. No one is a Bigfoot expert. You can't be an expert on something that we can't viably prove. Now, we can say that you are a top level researcher or something like that. I will give credence to that. I think there are some great researchers in different fields that know as much as you can about something. But that was a huge turning point for me. And I'd stepped away from podcasting for close to a year, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it yet. I was still working with Miracle Media, and I was still shooting films and all the other things, but I didn't know if I really want a podcast or not anymore. And I told Tony that I don't know. And he's like, I feel like it's definitely in you to do. You just got to figure out how you're going to do it. And I prayed about it a lot. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do this my way. And one, I don't really care if everybody in the conspiratorial world gets mad at me. I don't really care. Like, I'm just going to say what I feel, and specifically what I feel like God wants me to say.
Yeah.
Let the chips fall where they go. And I think that building the podcast from what it started out to be has been a interesting ride. I found myself sometimes very much in the middle, getting pegged by like 6 or 7 different groups of people. So I think recently I was getting nailed by the Gnostics and the Catholics at once. And I said, well, I don't really know what to say. So I just try to present historical facts a lot of times when I'm looking at things, and I try to present research the best way possible and showcase a very balanced view outside of the fact that I do draw the line on certain things when it comes to scripture. But otherwise, I do try to leave things as open-minded as possible about things we just don't know. And, it's like people that fight over the shape of the earth. And I remember being in a room where that wasn't really a thought. It was just people that were just, spitballing ideas, but now it's, you don't believe this and you're not a Christian. It's so crazy to me, like, to even think that that's even a thought process that people have. But social media's turned it into that. And that was why I did the first episode called The Cass Sunstein Effect, because of what Cass Sunstein and Adrian Vermeule basically created with the paper they wrote. Short version of the name of the paper is called Conspiracy Theories, and what they tried to present when it comes to how to manipulate the conspiratorial world. And that's the entire paper. It was about how to manipulate people who are trying to critically think. And really, it was an answer to 9/11. That's really what the paper was an answer to, because 9/11 wasn't that far removed from when the paper was written. And I believe at the time, 55% of New Yorkers knew that what the government was telling us wasn't true. So they were trying to find a way to herd people around into echo chambers, which they've done a really good job of doing over the past 15 years.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you think that the Cass Sunstein paper is actually caused the politicalization, is what I'd call it, of conspiracies and all that stuff? You know how it used to be easy, just now it's charged with that political energy. And you think this had something to do with it, possibly?
Absolutely. I think that was the sole goal, one of the goals, and also to infiltrate these spaces where people are trying to critically think with a lot of disinformation. And I mean real disinformation, not the buzzword that's been buzzing around the past 5-6
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
But real disinformation. And it's true. It's actually sad that we can't use the word misinformation or disinformation in these spaces without people automatically thinking you're some government shill. But the fact of the matter is, those things exist, and it's a lot of it. And it's tough to sift through what's true, what's not true. You know, it's like the plane crashes that happened in the past. Yeah, some stuff doesn't add up. But, you know, you've got gematria nerds sitting here talking about the way the plane landed, this number equals 666. And it's like, listen, I understand that gematria and numerology are a thing, especially to some of these occultists. It's a fact. That's not something that's not true. But the problem is it's not everything.
Exactly.
What happens is online, you got these content creators that that's their platform and they don't have anything else. It's like guys whose first name are Flat Earth, right? So they have nothing else to present. The antithesis to that, they automatically get angry or mad instead of inviting new information. Because what happens is, and I just use Flat Earth as an example, but there's several other ones, like Mandela effect's a big one that people get really angry over if you challenge some of the ideologies there. The problem is a lot of those conspiracies or theories were the quote unquote waking up moment for people. So if that was the central moment that you woke up and realized that things weren't quite what the government was telling us, or the world isn't exactly what they've been telling us it is, what happens if you are presented with information that isn't true, but that was your waking up moment? People double down, man. They're not going to invite the idea in that, you know what, maybe I was wrong again, but still things aren't right, but maybe I don't quite have it right. And I think that once you limit your scope and you become this ideology, then you've not allowed yourself for your mind to evolve and grow as God planned for us to do anyway. That's why he gave us brains to actually critically think. You know, the government's not always lying. Let's be honest. They're not always lying. Sometimes they're telling the truth. This idea of it's all fake, that's what the paper was written for. Cass Sunstein and Adrian Mule wrote this paper because they wanted people to feel isolated and feel like that everything's fake. You know, there's people that think we're living in a matrix, that you and we're not even real.
Simulation theory.
I'm just talking to, computer programs right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking to real people. Brandon, you guys aren't even real. What am I even doing here? And here's the thing. I don't have an issue with looking into some of these theories at all. And I've looked into a lot of them. But at the end of the day, what do we ground ourselves in? Are we going to ground ourselves in the creator and what he's given us? Or are we going to get perpetually caught up in this madness? And I'm telling you right now, a lot of Christians are caught up in the madness. They're
Absolutely.
not living life the way they're supposed to live. What I really can't stand right now, and I was talking to my preacher the other day, we were hanging out, and I told him, I was like, one of the things that really bothers me about Christians is they're always crying and moaning about going to heaven. Like, we were never meant for heaven. It wasn't even created for us. That was long before us. The earth was created for us. We're supposed to be stewards of the earth. I don't care how bad it gets. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to connect to our neighbor and fellowship and grow together. The problem is, one, the enemy doesn't want that. So he's going to try to create any kind of echo chambers and boxes for us to get caught up in where we lose sight of that. And secondly, we just have to start realizing what our actual purpose is. And I think that people aren't willing to internalize and look within and realize that, one, we are created as spiritual beings. So our connection to God, as Christians, we have the lifeline 24/7. We don't need to go to a priest to broker a deal to talk to God. We don't need to do a bunch of rituals to talk to God. None of that. Like, we can literally talk to him as we're walking down the road or whatever else. And I think once we realize that, we start living in a lot more peace and prosperity. Not to say that bad things don't happen. That's the inevitable position of sin and the way it was introduced into the world. But I feel like that we, especially as Christians who are trying to grow, we need to start looking at things in a more positive light instead of getting caught up in this just constant negativity. I mean, part of the problem is social media. You're just wrapped up in just the madness 24.
Without a doubt. Joel, you mentioned just kind of this language of waking people up, and you talked about it in your first podcast. I was wondering if you could kind of unpack that a little bit and how you don't, I believe you said you don't even like to use that
terminology
anymore, and just maybe the connections to Gnosticism and whatnot there.
I'm not a huge fan of waking people up. And I think that used to be a goal of mine years ago. That's the selfish part of what I was trying to build and other people around me. And I'm doing this to wake people up. Well, are you? Like, really? Because the more I started looking at it, was I really trying to wake people up? And secondly, what is waking people up? You know what I mean? People come to God and come to a realization of things around them on their own time. And we can present information and it may help people be able to see certain things. But my goal is not to wake people up. My goal is just to research, present information, and let the chips fall where they fall. People can take it how they want. It's not going to resonate with everybody. Every episode won't resonate with everybody. Believe me, I've had episodes where people will be really happy and those same people will be really angry the next week. That's the challenge of actually critically thinking and not falling into the conspiratorial wave, because every week there's new conspiracies, and I call them conspiracy junkies. They're looking for their next fix. They're looking for the next wildest thing that they can, hook up the IV to and get high. And that's what they do. And Christians are no better. And they're always looking for the devil behind every bush constantly, to the point that I wonder if they even know God exists, because they talk more about the devil than anything.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me how the human mind works and how it's changed so much since social media has become such a major part of our world. And not to say that there's not good things about it, for sure. If it wasn't for social media, we wouldn't be talking right now. But at the end of the day, do we let it control us, or do we control the narrative personally about how it affects us?
Yeah, that's what I appreciate about your first episode and some of the other podcasts too, is we have the same mindset, the three of us, to, like, we've had some podcasts where we went in and looked up just little general prophecies, not real big things. And we call them little, like, mysteries or whatever. And we've come down on the side of, like, hey, this is not really conspiracy. This guy just probably disappeared, or he probably fell down a hole, and it's just the logical explanation for it. And when I heard about you from this listener, she's like, man, you guys need to meet this guy, because this guy has the same heart you guys have about wanting the truth out there. I want to search for the truth. I want to search for the wisdom. We all want to find, the answers, but not to wake people up. I do see ourselves kind of warning people potential things going on, but you're right. You can get sucked into this negativity echo chamber. I've watched it, like you just mentioned, the planes. It was just 2. Now it's like 5. And people don't realize planes crash all the time. I will give that the first one in Washington was a little sus, a little sketchy. I just watch a lot of different podcasters get into sensationalism to get downloads, instead of actually just trying to work it out and figure out, what could possibly be the truth. Like you said, we can't empirically get to the truth because it's just supernatural stuff. You can't prove it like that. But when I listened to this, I was like, man, this is incredible. Now, I want to go into a little bit about the Cass Sunstein effect, and just a small, because I'm going to put this on the show notes for them to be able to look at and read. And the first question I want to ask you about it, what good did you get out of it? I mean, there was some good in here. I highlighted some good stuff. Of course, I always had his angle in my background, which I don't know if that's always good, realizing that he has an echo chamber and he has a way of looking at the world. But what in this document did you see good that would be a good warning for us people who like to cover this kind of stuff?
Well, that's a
hard one.
question.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I think one of the things that, if we just looked at it from a basic point of view, right, the paper is just the paper and not as propaganda, because I think there's propaganda in it for sure.
Absolutely.
So I think that if we just looked at it from a point of view of what you just said earlier about sensationalism, and I think that part of what he and Vermeulen are trying to spin is that because of 9/11, that sensationalism got out of control. So this is a way that we can mitigate the sensationalism by sending government operatives, whether physically or in chat rooms or Reddit threads, wherever they're permeating, and go in there and control them. And he actually lists several different ways of how it can be controlled. And one of those ways is what I said earlier, where you send a guy in who presents himself as a part of the group, and he starts adding embellishing more conspiracies. And he'll take, whatever's there that could be true, and then he'll add a lot of falsities to it. And when that happens, then it just starts spinning the entire thing out of control. And the other way that he talks about, and there's several different ways, it's just one of the other ones, is to go in there and basically say, hey, I'm a government operative. Here's actually the real truth, and try to drag other people into believing exactly what he's saying too. And all of this is done through what his terminology is cognitive infiltration. It's infiltrating the mind, basically.
Yeah.
And it's to isolate these people so much that they stop, or isolate them so much that you put them in a group where government operatives can easily take them out.
Yeah.
Sounds like COINTELPRO to me, with what the FBI did to radical groups. I mean, it's exactly what they did.
Well, yeah, I mean, he even talks about that in the he gives credence to some of the conspiracies. What really jumped out at me about it, he would say, well, even if the conspiracy is found to be a conspiracy theory, it's still a conspiracy theory, and that was a real interesting verbiage for me to see that. And I don't want to go through and poke out yet what I saw, but yeah, I want to learn from this too, and that's something that I think that this community that we're a part of, I don't know what to call it, fringe, whatever. But question community, it's like we need to be able to, like you just said, Joel, we need to be able to ask questions and not have one side jump us on another side jump us. We need to have a safe space to be able to say, so what do you think about it? And then somebody come and say, well, I don't know about that. And then we don't know how to have conversations anymore. And social media has ruined that. Not even debates.
In my opinion, it's all from this Cass Sunstein effect. So
he
dropped this paper out late 08, 09.
Obama's administration. Yeah.
You can see, and he actually worked for Obama at the time. And right after that, you'll see a massive influx of conspiracy theories. It really, I'd never seen anything like it. And that's when, and not that flat earth hadn't been around for a while, because it has, but it absolutely went nuclear right after that, especially around 2012 when a lot of the really hot documentaries started coming out. And then right after that, Mandela Effect, 2012. That's another one that started happening. Then that spun out of control. And around 2016, 2017, Tartaria started getting crazy in the space too. So again, I don't think that everything that's in those theories is false. There are things that I can look at any of those theories and say, well, they got that right, or that they got that right, in my opinion, obviously, because these are theories.
Right.
I don't necessarily have it right either.
Yeah, there is evidence, but not necessarily proof. Yeah.
But a lot of these theories started really escalating to the point that people took them on board as being almost in a religious manner. If you really want to talk about religious manner, I mean, look at Q. When Q started, the whole Q movement, that coincided with Trump's first run. So the people that were involved with that were following a mysterious Q that was giving them information, and people believed it. And to me, that is exactly what the Cass Sunstein effect was from the get-go. That's cognitive infiltration. That's literally infiltrating a group of people who are already there looking for answers, and then all of a sudden, you're giving them answers, and they're all following it. But at the same time, some of the things that were being presented as a part of this Q movement were true. In my opinion, there were some things that didn't make a lot of sense. Like there were things as part of the Pizzagate movement that didn't make sense to me, that I was able to look at and say, man, that, some of this stuff seems like it could be true. And I had to really at that time really start sifting through what I thought was the truth and what I thought was not true. Because the problem is most people get caught up in just believing the first thing they see when someone says, the government's lying to you, and then as soon as they see that, they automatically buy into it without even spending 5 minutes to look into what it could actually be. Give you an example. So this past Olympics, there was a female boxer. She ended up winning the whole thing. And it spun out of control, Fox News, everywhere else, that this was actually a man that was presenting themselves as a woman. Now, you look at her, she does look very masculine in a lot of ways. It's very easy to go down that route. So I didn't jump on board with that. I just saw social media going crazy. Everybody going nuts. I saw Fox News going nuts. And obviously CNN and the left were going nuts on the other end of the spectrum. It became this battle between right and left, very politicized.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started actually digging into it. It took me, I don't know, 5-10 minutes to look into it objectively. And I looked into the fact that, hey, she actually boxed in the prior Olympics 4 years before that. She actually lost in the second round, got knocked out by another female. So her record as a boxer wasn't very good, as a matter of fact, going into the Olympics. So it wasn't like she was some male mowing through all these women. It just wasn't true. So then we dig a little deeper and realize that, you know what, she might have been on PEDs. That seems more likely that she probably was on some sort of testosterone enhancing drugs or whatever else, which a lot of Olympians get caught with. That seems way more likely than this whole XY chromosome thing they're spewing out. And that's a possibility. And I'm not throwing it out that some of this stuff's not a possibility, but the problem was everybody jumped on board with it without having a lick of the full scope of the information before they bought into the fact that this was an actual woman. If this had been a man dominating the sport, this would have been happening for the past 8 years when she was actually boxing. So she also comes from a country where being a quote unquote transgender would not even be allowed. They would kill you in that country for being that in the first place. So nobody took any of that into account, but everybody was ready to jump on board to the fact that it's still going around that this is a male that's boxing. And I just had a big issue with stuff like that. And that's part of the reason why I started the podcast, was because of a lot of this disinformation that's being used to manipulate people. And I love it. And you brought up the word truther, which I'm not a fan of either. I love the truther crowd because they always think they have it figured out. And because it's not mainstream, that it's right. And there's a huge contingent of people that are so anti-mainstream that if it's against the mainstream, they automatically buy into it without any lick of research.
Yep,
It's your
I've
classic.
Of those. Yep.
It's your classic Karens that are stuck on Facebook all day, they'll see a headline and immediately jump on board with the headline and start typing in the comments. Well, that's what they want you to do, because these algorithms are built on the fact that you're commenting and engaging with the content. So if they can get you they can rage bait you, lure you in. Also, let's not even look into the fact of the dead internet theory, where the internet's been dead for like 10 years. And this is a known fact from companies that can track bot activity, that upwards to now, there's about 65-70% of all interaction online is from bots. That all these comments that you're engaging with, those arguments that people get into online for 2-3 weeks, I've seen it happen because I run social media accounts. They're probably arguing with a bot. They're not even real. But the AI has evolved so much now that it can literally argue with you until you're blue in the face. So it's creating the engagement. It's creating the hostility. X is built on the fact of being able to not only keep you in your echo chamber so you can argue with like-minded people, but to periodically throw you into other echo chambers to where you'll argue with other people who think differently than you. That's the way these algorithms work. But the problem
with their
is
two categories of like following, one people you're following and people, what you might be interested in, like that in X.
Correct.
I think, yeah.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And I think that is all stemming from the Cass Sunstein and Adrian Vermeule paper. I think I've seen a just massive upswing since that paper. And I can point to that paper as a big catalyst from when conspiracies changed, from us using our critical minds and just talking through things as a group of people and nobody fighting, to then it became a lot of infighting after that. That it became where there just really isn't a group of people who are actually trying to critically think. Not at all anymore.
Yeah, the Sunstein document reminds me a lot of I don't know if you're familiar with Jay Dyer. He says they put it right out there for you to read it, but most people don't read. They tell you exactly what they're doing, and I really think that. And in this document, I really saw a lot of that.
Yeah, the Sunstein cognitive, what'd you call it? Cognitive infiltration. I'm just kind of grinding on what you're saying, just thinking about this. It's like they don't want the conspiracy theories to basically stop, right? They don't want to stop them from happening. Instead, there's this manipulation, the desire to control them. And I'm thinking about that, and it's like if you introduce just enough doubt or noise, and then suddenly we got people who are asking the real questions, they're just drowned out by the lunatics that are talking about reptilian overlords or moon bases. And I don't think Sunstein's fighting misinformation in his paper. He's basically manufacturing it. And it's like, basically, it's the perfect con. You're creating a problem, you provoke a reaction, and then you serve up the solution. I mean, it's the Hegelian dialectic in action. Need more surveillance? Stage a crisis. You want more control or information? Let the conspiracy theorists run wild. Then label anyone who questions the official story as nut jobs or wackos. And so the game is no longer finding the truth. It's about making sure nobody else does.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And one of the big theories that Cass Sunstein pushed was the nudge theory.
Yeah,
and
from his book.
The nudge theory is, based on being able to present information to people to nudge them into doing what you want them to do. So it makes them feel like it's their decision and it's not a government entity telling them what to do, because nobody likes to be told what to do, especially in the United States.
Yeah.
So in the United States, to be able to manipulate people into falling down the road that you want them to follow down, or to buy the product you want them to buy, or whatever along those lines of thinking, you are able to nudge them into doing it by presenting them information that just moves them a little, just nudges them a little. And if you nudge them again, hey, they're exactly where you want them to be. And it operates the same way with conspiracy theories.
So basically, let's move a bunch of sick people in with elderly people who are dying and get them infected, and then they die, and then say, wear a face mask so you don't kill grandma?
Very much so. And to be honest with you, that whole, 2020 was not only devised to see how people were going to react to something on that big of a scale, but it was a thought experiment. It really was to see how people were going to react to information that's being given by quote unquote credible sources. And, funny enough, here in the past year or two, a lot of the information that was being squelched during that time has come back out around, and now it was actually true. So it's funny how that works, right? But the Cass Sunstein effect was in full effect during 2020 because they were working both ends of it. They were not only putting out propaganda through the mainstream outlets, but they were also putting out a lot of disinformation on the back end with conspiracy theorists as well. Because think about it, when that happened, put that whole thing to the side, there were, and still is, a massive spike in every kind of conspiracy theory you could possibly think.
Yeah.
Because of that one event, it has caused a major shift in the way that social media operates and how that people operate of getting information out. And it's just become an absolute cesspool of bizarre ideas. And listen, I'll go there. And I say this to people all the time. I'll go to the most bizarre place and I'll give credence where I think it could be, because I do believe in a very strange world around us.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I'm buying into everything reptilian story that's being thrown out there either.
Yeah. Well, Joe, let me ask you this. Do you think that, when I was reading through this article, I really got this strong impression, and I'm just simple, and I like to break it down for the people that are out there with our podcast to just simplify some of what we're saying. This reminds me a lot of how noise canceling earphones work, and how, to combat the frequency outside, the headphones emit the same frequency, which cancels out. Is that a lot of what we're seeing here with this document with the conspiracy theories? You have one, so let's put out another one that could possibly cancel this one out or mess it up or whatever. Is that a fair assumption?
In part. And I think that would be just one of the ideas that he's presenting, right? Because part of what he's also talking about is to get into these groups and twist the theory just a little bit, where we start implementing what we think that you need to be looking at, and then it takes your eyes off what you're already looking at, and then before you know it, becomes super convoluted, and now the group itself starts fighting. That's the ultimate goal, is to dissipate the group itself. So if you can implement, and listen, here's the best part. The way he's presenting it, it looks good, because there are groups of people who are literally built on actual disinformation. They're believing absolutely nothing that's true. And so his idea is, let's get in there, let's just mix it up enough to where we can disseminate the group, or they'll actually strengthen themselves to where, okay, now we've got a set group of guys we can go take out. It's in the FBI in, CIA in, whatever. We can actually allow them to get to a point to where they're about to commit a crime and then arrest them. So that's part of what he's saying. Now, the underlining part of it that we have to really look at as critical thinkers is he's also talking about actual conspiracies that people are onto, that people see. He specifically brings up 9/11 several times. And
JFK.
He does that. Yeah, he does that for a reason, because 9/11 is a conspiracy at this point. It's not a theory anymore. It's a conspiracy. We don't have all the facts, but we do know from multiple whistleblowers who have been in 3-letter agencies who have come out since, who have said that they knew something was coming down the pipe before it happened. They were prepared for what was going on. So we do know at this point that the government knew, whether the government was involved or whether they just allowed a group of people to do what they did because they knew that the end game would be war. They allowed it. Caused or allow, we can argue that all day, but at the end of the day, we know at this point it's a conspiracy. So his argument is, we just need to wipe them all out. All these conspiracy theories, they need to listen to the government. The government knows what's best for you. And that's the real story of what's really going on in this paper. However, he wants to present it in such a positive light.
It cracked me up, Joel. He kept using in an open system. And I'm sitting here thinking, America is an open system? Really? Yeah, Operation Mockingbird? I mean, we can trust our media? Anyway.
Right. And to his point, what he's using as a juxtaposition or other countries where they don't have any kind of freedom, right? None.
Yeah.
So it's a completely closed system. So his argument is that the United States is not a closed system in the sense of that we have freedoms and we're able to talk about and freely express ideas and bounce ideas off each other. But to what you said, though, you're not wrong either, because when it comes to how they get the information out, that part of it is closed. When we're talking about the way governments want to present information to us, they'll present it any way they want. I mean, just look at the whole drone fiasco months ago. You had guys coming out talking about that there were motherships from the Middle East coming over here, and they were shooting out drones. And
I didn't hear that one.
It was on Fox News, and that was pure insanity to me. I mean, it was so insane that even and I don't remember her name, but the lady that worked for Fox News was even like cocking her head to the side that this senator was actually saying this. But I believe that was a thought experiment in itself. Hey, let's get this guy up here and let's see how many people will believe what he has to say. Let's see if they're really still on board with this or if they're still questioning everything. And everybody just blew that guy off. They're like, here we go. Government trying to lie to us again. So they literally reeled that whole thing back in. They came up with the whole answer of why he said that, and they moved on from it. They act like it was never even talked about. But I think that was a thought experiment to see how many people are going to believe this wild concocted tale that we're going to throw out there. Yeah, maybe 40 years ago they would have believed that, but not in this day and age. Like, people are just way more skeptical about what our government has to say to us about anything.
Yeah, well, it's genius. It's genius, really. I mean, you make people so paranoid about disinformation that they become their own censors. They second guess every thought, every question, until they don't really know what's real anymore. And, we're kind of beating around the bush, but they'll eventually beg for someone to come in and say, hey, give us all the answers, tell us the truth. And, Big Brother will be right there. And they'll give them the only truth that they're allowed to hear.
Hey, yeah, I'm kind of piggybacking on that, Joel. Something I really wanted to get into to ask before our time's up, and this might take a little while, but what are some principles or some tools that you use on discernment when you discern this kind of stuff? How do you filter through? What are your just tricks or whatever?
Skeptical immediately. So I don't care if it's coming out of the conspiratorial world. I'm super skeptical.
Skeptical, even the skeptics, huh?
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
And I think you have to be.
Yep.
And I think I've become more skeptical over the past year than at any point in my life, because I've seen so much just absolute insanity coming out of people who are supposedly trying to find the truth. But I also keep in the back of my head the famous phrase, the truth is stranger than fiction. So I do keep that in the back of my head too, that if somebody says they saw a 9-foot gray alien that was trying to attack them in the back of their house, that I'm not blowing that off either, because there could be something to that, especially when we're talking about interdimensional beings and what goes on in the spiritual realm. So I don't throw any of that out, but I want to look into it properly. I don't want to just believe it because it's wild. And so many people are caught up in that idea. The more bizarre, the better, because that's the fix they need, because they're unhappy with their own lives. And you were asking me what I do. One of the big things I do is pray. One of the big things I do is ground myself
in the Word,
in who God is.
Yeah.
And have him help guide me. And I'm not always perfect with that because I'm a human being, but I do move that direction, because at the end of the day, Brandon, Lindsay, BT, it don't really matter. All that matters is that we're trying to grow with God.
Yeah.
And we are trying to work with the people around us in our communities to build something better. No matter who's in office, who becomes president, whatever else, none of that really matters. You know, we can take our part in whatever we feel that God's leading us to take our part in when it comes to those things. But that's not indicative of how we're going to live our lives. You don't need to be looking for anybody as a savior, put it that way. Like, we need to be knowing that there is one savior and he's already done his job. All we need to do is do our jobs at this point and understand that he's with us every step of the way. Once we start living life like that, none of this stuff starts bothering us as much. You know, I've noticed that two things. The conspiratorial world is filled with actual crazy people. Let's be honest. It's actual people that are schizophrenic, and they found a place that they can thrive in and be accepted. So they're there, and they are. I see them. I know they're not well mentally. I know they're unstable. You can see that the way they act. Number two, a big one is people that are super unhappy with their own lives. They're looking for a finger to point at why their life isn't what they think it should be. Why didn't I achieve what so-and-so achieved? Why didn't I get to this point? Well, it's because I didn't sell my soul. That's why I'm not successful. You're only successful if you sell your soul to Satan.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess King David sold his soul then because he was the king of the Israelites. You know, it doesn't make sense when you look at things biblically, because God gives success to everyone in their own way, right? You might not be a billionaire. You might not be a multimillionaire, but you might be successful in the position God put you in your life. But then again, you might be a multimillionaire and still be walking with God because God's allowed you to be a steward of that money to help grow his kingdom. So we can't throw that out either. It's not all one thing. And I have such an issue with people that try to make everything all this without looking at the nuances of life and how that everyone's different. Everyone operates differently. God has a plan. I've noticed that so much with this, whatever you want to call it, space that we operate in. And it's really at the core, a lot of unhappy people. And it's people that just don't have what God has given them already. They just don't want it. And I'm speaking specifically to Christians that are in this space. They're super unhappy. Like, why are you unhappy? You shouldn't be. God didn't put us on this earth to be unhappy.
Well, and I want to throw something in too, Joel, to add to that list that it just hit me. And I mean, I could even throw myself in this category, to be honest. But the almighty dollar is a factor here too. You know, these sensational books that these Christians put out about end time stuff and all this wild, wacky stuff, that makes them money. So that's a factor that, you know, if we're going to be skeptical, we need to just look at the almighty dollar, the almighty mammon, and realize that, you know, that's there too, and be able to filter through that. You agree with that?
Totally agree. I think that you'll see a lot of Christian influencers or Christians who push a lot of end times propaganda to get followers, to get people to buy their books. And I want to say this too as a caveat. I don't know if they're all bad people either.
No.
I don't know if they're necessarily doing it for that reason sometimes. I just think that they get caught up in the fray of what's hot and they feel like they're doing what God wants them to do too. So you got that part of it. And you also got the false prophets. So you got that going on too.
Right.
One of my biggest jokes is that the end times have been coming since I was a kid. I remember in the 80s when it was the barcode they were going to tattoo on you, and then it became the chip, and now it's going to be some sort of injection that changes your DNA. And listen, it could be. I'm open to whatever, but at the end of the day, why are we always looking for the world to end? It's just insane to me. And to be honest with you, there has always been upheaval and turmoil in the world. You could go to
Yes.
any period of time and talk to a group of people who aren't doing that well, and they would probably tell you the world's about to end. So it's not that I think that we shouldn't be aware of what's coming down the pipe to protect ourselves in the best way possible. It's just that we shouldn't let those things rule our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's real. And I say that with, I don't have any accusations against any certain person, but I think it's something that we can just, even in my own heart, I don't want our podcast to be a means to make money on sensational type of stuff. And so I want to check my heart, but it's real easy to slide into it. Like you said, not even realizing, because we are human and we're fallible and we can make mistakes. So I wanted to ask you just a real quick question we usually ask most people on our show, and you can feel free to answer or not. What is the most supernatural thing that you've seen since you've become a Christian?
Wow, that's a big one. I don't know. A lot. I think you got kind of a mixed bag because
Give us two or three. I mean, we like stories, so tell us stories.
Yeah, I just recently I'm on an episode of the Confessionals, and we had a guy in studio that came in. It was myself, Cryptids of the Corn podcast, Tony obviously, and this guy named TJ who lives in a very paranormal environment and has seen Bigfoot, I think up to like 16 times, something like that. And very credible source. The guy's not looking for any kind of notoriety. He just came on the show because we asked him to, and we knew him through Cryptids of the Corn, and we'd been trying to get him on the show for a while. There's some sort of thought that he could possibly have some sort of Nephilim bloodline in him as well, because he's got some very weird things that surround who he is. He's pretty tall. He had double rows of teeth as a kid. They had to have him pulled, and just some interesting things around him, the way that nature works around him, that even him seeing things as bizarre as White Walkers and them being scared of him. So that's pretty weird. And a lot of the supernatural world, the way it interacts around him. But this happened very recently. I talk about it on the podcast, but when I was there first at the Airbnb. They get there and I heard them when they came in, and I was already asleep. It was probably about 2 or 3 in the morning. And when they laid down, I went back to sleep, and something massive was sitting on the bed with me and was choking me out basically, and had pushed me down, and I could look up and see, but I couldn't see what it was. It just looked like a massive black mass next to me. Very, very similar to what somebody might see if they saw a Hat Man or something dark.
Yeah.
And immediately I prayed to Jesus, and it felt like something else was in the room with me and pulled it off of me and yanked it just into, I don't even know where. So it was very odd situation. I don't know what the catalyst was for that happening, so I don't want to speculate on air about what I think could have been, but that was very recent, very bizarre type of thing. I can say in the dream world recently, in the past few days, I was walking through a corridor and something large and dark, very similar to that, tried to pull me through some other realm or mirror realm or something. And I prayed again and it left. So those are very recent activity. As far as over the past 4 or 5 years that I've faced, I've had several things happen to me. Tony and I have had things happen in the woods that were very bizarre that we can't explain. That'll be out in one of the films that we're coming out with.
Can't wait for that. So that sounds exciting.
Well, we've got some very interesting stuff because we've got about 3 or 4 films on the editing floor right now. So we've got a lot coming.
Let's sit there. Go ahead. Give us your deets. Tell us what's going on. Tell us what you're up to, and give us the places that people can find you at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot. I do run different social media accounts for different podcasters and influencers, Tony being one of them. Also, I run my own podcast, Free the Rabbits, which you can find anywhere, YouTube,
It's on my listen list now.
Spotify, Apple, wherever else. Also, I have been shooting films with Tony for the past 3.5 years. We've got several films on the cutting board right now. We've got one where we actually went to a place called the Meadow Project, and it is a very interesting place. We had to sign NDAs to even get out there.
Wow.
And there's a group of guys that have been going out there for almost 10 years now that have had some of those most bizarre things happen. And one of them was a giant cube portal opened up and two guys went through it. The environment changed around them, very similar to like something you would see on Stranger Things. They came out of it, but it was all caught on thermal, which we're actually going to show in the film. They're allowing us to finally release it to the world. But I've seen the film. It's legitimate. So
Amazing.
It's very bizarre. We actually went out there, had a lot of really wild things happen the entire week we were there. Obviously, I won't talk about it here, but we will definitely release it for the film. I shot another film last year based on a ton of research that I did on Alistair Crowley and his connection to cryptids here in the United States during his time here. So we've got an interesting film there. It's called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast. And we got several researchers involved with that, including Isaac Weishaupt and Juan Ayala, Tony Merkel. And we went everywhere from Salt Lake City to Connecticut, Upper Ohio, and Michigan to shoot this film. And we've got a weird connection between Crowley and the Melonheads with a monstrous connection to Joseph Smith and Mormonism as well. So all that's tied in together.
Wow. You just overlapped several of our subjects and worlds there with a lot of that.
Yeah, we're doing some real deep diving with the Process Church and some other stuff. So, yeah.
It tends to overlap. And one of the things that I found in a lot of my research and just even in my past life when I was personally involved with the occult and a lot of occult practices is that it all overlaps. When you're talking about the spiritual world and you're talking about cryptids and UFOs and entities and all that, it tends to tie right back into a lot of these major occultists that have been around for centuries and alchemists. So when you start tying that in together, you start realizing that there's more to it than just the fact that somebody saw something weird. It could have been conjured. It could have been a connection with, some sort of quote unquote scientific experiment that was going on behind the scenes too. So that was one of the weird connections I found a year or so ago. I did a ton of research and we ended up building an entire film around the research, which was pretty cool. We've got another film where Tony and I actually had something massive run up on us in the woods that we can't explain, and it freaked us out for sure. And that's going to be part of another film that we shot throughout Kentucky and Tennessee too.
Is it you? I haven't binged your podcast yet. I will. Is it you that's associating a lot of? You did some episodes on Crowley and intelligence community too. Is that you?
Yeah, I've got an ongoing series right now with Alistair Crowley and his connection to MI5, MI6. At the time, it wouldn't have been called MI5, MI6 because it was just intelligence groups that were working out of British intelligence. So oddly enough, during that time, there was a bunch of intelligence groups and they were kind of competing against each other and they weren't working together like they do now. So Crowley came up through Cambridge, like many very intelligent people who have worked for governments and different operations throughout history. And a lot of occultists, as a matter of fact, came up through Trinity College in Cambridge. And Crowley was, from all indications, he was recruited there by Lord Salisbury to become an operative for them. And part of the allure with Crowley was his genuine interest in the occult. And what he was trying to achieve there, the government could use, because if he could get into these secret societies and these groups, then he could keep tabs on what was going on with some of these elites that were part of these groups. So he basically was killing two birds with one stone when he was signed up through these intelligence organizations in British intelligence. So he was kind of doing what he wanted to do. And I've got a massive tie-in with him actually being the catalyst that helped start World War I, which is very interesting when he was over here in the United States. So I do have a pretty high fascination with a lot of things that Crowley has done. I would say in my past, I had a high interest in what he wrote because I was trying to achieve those things. I have more of an academic interest now because I've found so many different layers to what he was doing. Some people think he's a charlatan and thought he was just scamming people. Some people think that he was just British intelligence and he was using the occult as a way to get into these groups and didn't actually believe in it. Some people like myself believe that he was all of them. He was a charlatan to some people. He was definitely tied into the occult. his whole interaction with ayahuasca and creating the religion of Thelema was a whole nother beast. And literally, he called himself the beast. And he was trying to bring the OTO over here to the United States, which he ended up doing. And Jack Parsons helped kind of drag that on into California after Crowley died. But yeah, Crowley had a lot of layers to him. I mean, even his interactions when he was in Mexico were pretty wild, because he was helping broker the oil that was being pumped out of Mexico and connected it to the British government. So Britain was then able to use that oil to power their ships.
Wow. Well, cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, you guys check out his podcast and get all this stuff. I mean, I know I definitely am, and just dive in. And it's coming from a viewpoint that I think I don't know Joel very well, but I like what he has to say, and I think he's very trustworthy with this, because just his skepticism. Yeah,
it's a very refreshing and much needed voice in this sort of fringy space we occupy. I really appreciate you, Joel.
Yeah. Yep.
Appreciate you guys.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.